Welcome everyone to this deep dive historical explainer. Today we're looking at the life of a man whose personal transformation literally reshaped the geopolitical map of the world. We're talking about the life and the massive legacy of Islam's second caliph, Umar bin Khattab. Okay, let's dive right into this. You know, Islam is one of the fastest growing religions today, followed by nearly 2 billion people all across the globe. But what is absolutely staggering is the foundation laid by Umar. 1400, that's the number. The administrative system and the vast empire he built have lasted over 1400 years. To put that into perspective for a second, in just a few short years, he forged an empire that surpassed even Alexander the Great or the pharaohs of Egypt. And the systems he established in those lands, well, they largely endure to this very day. It's wild.
Part 1. The Quraysh and Tribal Dynamics. So, how exactly did he pull this off? To truly understand Umar's incredible success and, honestly, his highly unique personality, we can't just look at his time as caliph. We've got to step back first and look at the complex political landscape of ancient Mecca.
For centuries, a single massive tribe known as the Quraysh controlled Mecca. But as they grew, they splintered into sub-tribes, dividing up responsibilities to keep the peace among their most powerful factions. Look at how this is broken down. First up, you have Banu Hashim. That's the Prophet Muhammad's tribe holding the religious power, led by figures like Abdul Muttalib. Then there's Banu Umayyah, led by Abu Sufyan. They controlled the wealth, the entire Meccan economy. And finally, you've got Banu Makhzum. These were the fierce warriors, possessing all the weapons and war strategies, led by powerful guys like Abu Jahl.
Now you might just assume Umar came from one of those top 3 powerhouses, right? Actually, he didn't. He belonged to a totally different subtribe, Banu Adi. They served a very specific function. They were essentially the ambassadors and spokespersons for the Quraysh. Whenever explosive internal conflicts erupted between those other factions we just talked about, it was Banu Adi who stepped in to fix things through diplomacy and debate.
And this brilliantly illustrates the fascinating paradox of his personality. On his father's side, he inherited those Banu Adi traits, right? Diplomacy, the patience to debate, the ability to solve massive problems through negotiation. But look at his mother's side. His mother, Hantama, was from Banu Makhzum. Remember them? That fierce, weapon-wielding warrior tribe? So Umar inherited this intense, forceful, and famously angry mindset too. It's like he could reason with you brilliantly, but if words failed, he had a warrior's fiery temperament ready to take over.
And physically and socially, Umar was literally an absolute giant. Historical sources describe his towering height. We're talking an estimated 6'6" or taller in today's measurements. People said that when he walked in a group, it looked like he was riding a camel while everyone else was on foot. No joke. Plus, he was a champion wrestler, a super successful import-export businessman traveling to Yemen and Syria, and eventually he became the lead ambassador for the Quraysh. By age 27, he was already this wealthy, highly respected pillar of Meccan society.
Part 2. Fierce opposition to Islam. Right at that absolute peak, when Umar was 27, the Prophet Muhammad began preaching Islam. As the lead ambassador of Mecca, Umar's immediate instinct was to vigorously protect Meccan traditions and, of course, the vital economy that his entire society depended on.
His early opposition wasn't just resistance, it was intensely hostile. Before his conversion, he lived a pretty typical life for the Meccan elite, drinking, gambling, but his hostility toward the early Muslims was exceptionally brutal. In one incredibly harrowing anecdote from the sources, Umar beat a Muslim slave relentlessly just for her faith. He literally only stopped because he became too physically exhausted to keep striking her.
Yet, amidst all that cruelty, a turning point started to take shape. One day, Umar passed by a slave who had been beaten nearly unconscious by Abu Jahl. Uncharacteristically, Umar reached out and actually helped the man up. The grateful slave looked right at him and said, "By God, you are the better of the two." Now this totally confused Umar, but the slave was referring to a very famous prayer. The Prophet had prayed, "O Allah, strengthen Islam with one of the 2 Umars," meaning either Umar bin Khattab or his fierce uncle Abu Jahl. Part 3. The turning point. Embracing Islam. Frustrated by endless tribal meetings about how this new religion was ruining the Meccan economy and their prestige, Umar finally hit a breaking point. He made a shocking decision that absolutely no one else had the nerve to make. He decided to assassinate the Prophet.
Let's trace his fateful steps here. First, he sets out, sword in hand, marching straight for the Muslim headquarters. But he gets intercepted on the road by his best friend, who, plot twist, had secretly already converted to Islam.
Terrified by Umar's deadly intent, the friend desperately tries to divert him. He tells him, "Hey, before you go to the Prophet, look at your own house." And then, the horrifying realization hits Umar. His own sister Fatima and her husband had secretly converted. Completely enraged, he immediately diverts his path straight to their house.
Now, let's slow down for a second, because what happens next literally changes history forever. Umar bursts into his sister's house in an absolute blind rage. He attacks her husband, and when Fatima bravely tries to intervene, Umar strikes her. But when he looks down and sees his own sister bleeding, everything just stops. The physical sight of her blood completely shatters his anger. In that sudden, remorseful quiet, he asks to read the verses of the Quran they were holding, and upon reading them, his heart completely turns. He takes his sword, heads straight back to the Prophet, and to the absolute shock of everyone there, he submits and accepts Islam. He was around 32 or 33 years old at the time. And consider this number, 50. At the exact moment Umar converted, the entire global Muslim community consisted of just 50 people. Exactly 40 men and 10 women.
Now, what's really interesting here is the immediate explosive shift in confidence that his conversion brought. It was undeniable. Before Omar, the Muslims were incredibly vulnerable. They were forced to pray entirely in secret. But after Omar, the fear just vanished. He immediately went to the leaders who hated Islam the most, guys like his uncle Abu Jahl, and boldly declared his faith right to their faces. He even hired a guy to announce his conversion through the streets. Because of Omar's sheer presence and protection, the Muslims marched out together and prayed openly at the Kaaba for the very first time.
Part 4. Migration and years of struggle. When the Muslims eventually migrated to Medina, they arrived with absolutely nothing. They left their homes and businesses totally behind. The Prophet systematically paired each migrant with a local from Medina, an Ansari. And Omar partnered with his Ansari brother beautifully. To balance survival and learning, they split their time. One day, the Ansari would go learn from the Prophet while Omar ran their business, and the next day, they'd swap. It was a brilliant, highly structured way to build a new life from scratch.
Over the next decade, Umar was front and center for every major event on this timeline. At the Battle of Badr, his decisive stance on prisoners earned him the title Al-Faruq, which means the one who distinguishes truth from falsehood. He stood completely firm through the brutal battles of Uhud and Khandaq. During the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, he famously and furiously debated the terms, thinking they made the Muslims look weak, though he later realized the profound wisdom in the Prophet's peaceful strategy. And by the Battle of Tabuk, Umar was so devoted that he donated half of his entire accumulated wealth to fund the army. Half!
Part 5. The Prophet's Passing and the Prime Minister. Then came a moment that almost broke him completely. When the news of the Prophet's passing hit Medina, the emotional shockwave was just unimaginable. Omar, this literal giant of a man, was in such violent denial that he drew his sword right there in the mosque, threatening to behead anyone who dared say the Prophet was dead. It actually took the calm, grounded wisdom of his closest companion, Abu Bakr, to recite verses from the Quran and finally bring Omar back to reality.
But what truly defines Omar here is his ability to quickly pivot for the greater good. Despite his own overwhelming grief, he instantly recognized a brewing political crisis. Different factions in Medina were already starting to argue over who should lead next. So, to avert a disastrous power struggle, Omar stepped right up, prioritized unity over everything else, and immediately pledged his allegiance to Abu Bakr. This single act effectively stabilized the entire city in an instant.
During Abu Bakr's reign as the first caliph, Umar essentially acted as his prime minister, and honestly, his contributions were monumental. After the Battle of Yamama, where many men who had memorized the Quran were tragically killed, it was Umar's visionary foresight that championed the idea to compile the Quran into a single physical book to preserve it. He was deeply involved in all statecraft. Though he did notably clash with Abu Bakr over the brilliant but highly independent General Khalid bin Walid, who, ironically enough, was Umar's own cousin from his mother's warrior tribe.
Part 6. Election of the Second Caliph. Which brings us to our final chapter. Just 2 years later, Abu Bakr falls severely ill and is on his deathbed. By this point, the Islamic State has pushed outward, engaging both the mighty Persian and Roman empires at the exact same time. The future of this rapidly expanding entity is hanging entirely in the balance.
Abu Bakr consulted the senior companions about his successor, and some of them were genuinely worried. They really feared Umar's legendary temper and strictness. But Abu Bakr defended him brilliantly. He said, "Umar acts strict only because he sees me being soft. When he becomes caliph, his personality will change.
Abu Bakr understood that duality of Umar's nature, the diplomat and the warrior, better than anyone else.
Let's look at how this builds into an incredibly rare historical moment. First, Abu Bakr consults the companions. Then he dictates his final will to Uthman, even fainting from illness during the process. And finally, he officially chooses Umar. But what's totally revolutionary here is what he didn't do. He didn't choose his own son. He didn't choose a family member. In an era completely dominated by royal bloodlines and kingships, this was a profoundly democratic and meritocratic transfer of power. He simply chose the absolute best, most capable man for the job.
And that brings us to a final, profound question. How did a man who once marched out with a drawn sword to literally destroy Islam become the very architect of its greatest and longest-lasting empire? It's a grand, beautiful paradox, isn't it? A man of intense aggression who completely transformed into the ultimate administrator of justice. I hope this explainer into Umar bin Khattab's extraordinary life leaves you marveling at the sheer scale of this history and really leaves you wanting to dive in and learn more. Thanks so much for exploring this with me today.